Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords, and today I'm here to do a review of Wretched Country, which is published by The Red Room. This is the first of several reviews I'm going to be doing of products by The Red Room. If you're not familiar with them, The Red Room have a YouTube channel. I think they're a couple. They're a guy and a girl anyway, who are, they might be married, who talk about RPGs, the OSR. They're extremely based. Let's put it that way. Extremely based. They've had me on their channel a couple of times. And the first time they had me on their channel, they didn't have any RPGs really, so at least not any OSR RPG materials published. And the second time they invited me was a couple of weeks ago. And by that time, they had, like a dozen OSR games. And they've sent me some of those to review. So this is going to be the first of those. So that's because it stood out to me the most. This is Wretched Country. And all of their RPGs, all of them are OSR, and all of them have a certain type of aesthetic, which is this kind of, they call it the Wretched verse. I call it kind of like spaghetti punk, right? Because they have that kind of morally ambiguous, slightly sleazy style of European movies from the 70s and 80s, including, of course, the spaghetti Western, which is what Wretched Country explicitly says it's about. It's about emulating the spaghetti Western style of adventuring. And one of the reasons why this stood out to me so much is because I'm a huge... I'm a historian, and it wasn't my particular area, but I've done huge amounts of historical study into the Wild West, out of a personal fascination. This is my hobby, right? Like talking about the history of religion and stuff like that. That was my job. That was my professional stuff. But when I want to have fun, I look at stuff about famous gunfighters or weird personalities. You don't want to overlook the non-gunfighter personalities of the West, because some of them were remarkable too. But anyway, so I'm a big fan of the West as a setting. And I ran a fairly long campaign using aces and eights that was a completely historical Wild West setting. It was meant to be, the story as it more or less happened in history, and as a sandbox type of game. So I'm an admirer of the genre. And Aces and Eights is an excellent RPG for running Wild Western games. I'm not so convinced that a standard OSR system is going to be as good, but that's what we're going to do here. We're kind of compare it, Aces and Eights versus Wretched Country, to see how well it stacks up. Of course, Wretched Country does have some advantages. Aces and Eights it's not OSR exactly, although its system is kind of similar because its system came out of like the Hackmaster system, and so there's it's not something that'll be horribly unrelatable to an OSR gamer, but it does have some weird elements to it, and it has a very top heavy amount of like skill selection and special abilities and things like that. Like, so the character creation's more ponderous. It's a point buy that, so there's stuff about it that is not nearly as good right from the start, but there are other things it does which are really good. Now, I'm not going to do a review of Aces and Eights. This is a review of Wretched Country, so I'm going to talk about it only in the context of thinking of my campaign, why my campaign was really successful, and whether Wretched Country could match up to that. So as you can see, the book is soft cover. Don't know how much it costs, but I will try to put a link to it in the description to the video. And it's 130 pages if you include the character sheet, which, as you can see, is a very simple sort of OSR character sheet. The back makes it very clear that this is for a spaghetti Western inspired setting, and it actually has a scenario that is not even a Western scenario, but rather a scenario about an international film crew traveling to Spain to shoot a movie believed to be cursed. So it's like a Western themed horror scenario. And then there's a setting that they have that is for specifically spaghetti Western adventures. There are, by the way, some people that like magic in their Wild West adventures. And, you know, a little magic maybe is not a bad thing, but too much magic is potentially a problem, I think, in Westerns. I don't think that the Wild West genre really needs to have anything supernatural in it. Like my Wild West campaign had zero genuine supernatural stuff in it, right? Like there were people who there were shamans who might have visions and things like that were, products of the ecstatic dancing or sweat lodges or things like that. But they couldn't cast spells, right? And there were no monsters that were not normal creatures that really exist in the world. And it worked very, very well. But some people like that. And so then in this system, from what I've read, there is definitely magic as an option. Of course, you can take it out. So the basics are very similar to anything in the OSR, with one exception, that one of the things, like in keeping with the spaghetti Western theme, which again, you could also try to like downplay if you really wanted to. One of the first things you do before anything else is choose what your cardinal sin is, right? So you got here the traditional 7 deadly sins, right? Wrath, greed, sloth, pride, lust, envy, gluttony. And in theory, every character should have one of these, right? At least one that is like their dominant flaw as a person, which I think is clever for the spaghetti Western genre. It's not a bad idea, because that's like, spaghetti Western characters are anti-heroes at best, if not outright villains. The attributes are all standard, right? The 3d6 range. Yikes, having trouble keeping this up here. Languages, hit points. You can see here the class types that you can choose from: assassins, common folk, conjurers, optional class, gunman, performer, scholar, scoundrel, shaman, optional class, right? So when we get to the leveling, and so you can see it like conjurer, somebody who can do magic in the Wild West, is an optional class. It'll depend on what the DM wants, I guess. Classes are all topped at level 10 here. And you can see that hit points are accelerating each level, right? Like it's a D6 each level for the assassin, a D8 each level for which one is that? The gunman. I'm not sure how well that works. One of the things that you see in Aces and Eights, for example, is that you have a set hit point number. I mean, it can alter slightly, but it doesn't. It's not an exploding with level type hit point thing, and so that makes it potentially much more deadly for a gunfight. And you can take a lot of damage, grazing wounds and whatnot, and survive. But there's also like a wound system where if you take a hit, and let's say that you're firing a pistol, it does a D6. A 1 or 2 points of damage will do almost nothing to you. But if you get like 5, 6, or to say nothing, if from a rifle hit you get like 9 or 10 points of damage, then even if you were at full hit points and you had like 25 or 28 hit points or whatever, which is possible, and that's about the cap. I think 21 or 22 is the normal cap for hit points for characters in Aces and Eights, if I remember correctly. But even if you take a hit that's like 5 or more points of damage, that has serious repercussions, right? Like your character could be temporarily incapacitated or have other serious consequences depending on the hit location. So one of the things I don't think fits all that well with most Western genres is this idea of being like full of hit points. Now, of course, it is true that in some Western moments, somebody can get shot and they're like, oh, it's just a flesh wound, right? Or something like that. But you don't usually see someone getting shot like 10 times and then still somehow surviving, right? Like usually part of the deal in Westerns is that shots can be pretty lethal. Everything else here is about standard. The skills, you'll see our skills in exactly the same style as like Lion and Dragon and Star Adventure. For some reason, there's an armor table here. Like, I'm not too sure that this is an adequate, like, these are all unlikely. Well, it says here, types of armor unlikely to be used in a Western style. I mentioned as examples, right? Maybe they should have just instead used examples of what you would do if you, like, if you were behind cover or something like that. But okay. I think that they just kind of cheaped out on that a little bit. Travel, encumbrance, saving throws. So saving throws are based on an ability score. So their mechanic for saving throws is you roll equal or less than the ability score, depending on what it is. So like Constitution is for drugs, poison, etc. Wisdom is about avoiding mental trauma. Dexterity for skipping over a trap or something. And I mean, I guess that works fine. It means that you have high potential for saving than you would normally have, higher than you would normally have in D&D. But that's probably okay. I'm more worried about the inflation of hit points than the balancing out of saving throws. It also means that your saving throws don't really change that much as you level, does it? So there you are. That's actually kind of good, because it means there are some things that'll still have a good chance of killing you even at high levels, no matter how many hit points you've got. So skills are a d20 plus the skill bonus plus ability score versus modifier, exactly the same as in my games. And you get a list of skills here. Experience is an interesting thing, because it uses an experience point system. All classes are the same, but the experience points you get are set up in this way for the wretched characters of the spaghetti Wild West. And so if you act selfishly, you get 50 experience points. You get experience points for people you kill. You get experience points for things you steal. You get experience points for seducing people. You get experience points for acting like a narcissist and indulging in your vices. So it's all about being scum, right? And you get XP for being scum, and that's good in the context of this setting, right? Obviously, if you're planning to run a Western where the characters are like white hats, you're going to have to change that around, but it's easy enough to change. I like that the experience points are largely based, even though obviously you get experience points for fights. I like that they're based on the morality, right? And what the characters, how the characters act. That's clever. There's also a wanted level, which is kind of, but not automatically tied to experience level, which would indicate, how likely there is to be a price on your head and what it would be, which is a very good mechanic. That's very, very clever. Prime requisite bonuses apply. And we get to combat. So you can see the interior has like fairly good. It's fairly well designed. The structure of the book seems solid, and the art is fine. The layout is fine. I think it's quite professionally done. Also, there are occasional typos, of course, but that happens all the time. The combat system is not particularly different from any other OSR combat system. So characters are wounded, they lose hit points. When they get to 0, they're unconscious. They're allowed a Constitution saving throw to avoid character death in the next 10 minutes. If someone heals them, so I think that it's a little bit too easy on the healing for sure. If at minus 15 being like the point where there's only when you're at negative 15 hit points is there no chance of survival. I think that's a little bit too lenient for the genre they're trying to represent, especially, but for Western adventuring in general. Not totally convinced by that. The healing skill, characters can recover points fairly quickly again. So, I mean, I guess because it's cinematic, right, that's kind of all right. But, if you wanted it to be grittier, you'd need to have people taking more time to recover. My campaign was meant to be realistic, so people would sometimes end up being, out of commission for weeks or something, and that's something that Aces and Eights kind of did well. There's stuff on diseases here, chlamydia, etc. That's good. And we've got here some of the different combat options. None of this is especially unusual until you get to the duels. So you can do a gunfighting duel in a faster and cinematic way, which is that you roll a d6 plus dexterity plus quick draw on a table. And so the two characters basically shoot at each other, and depending on what they rolled, but it's based basically entirely on speed and dexterity, which is kind of interesting. But I think that's a little bit too simplistic a mechanic for a duel. I've seen somewhat better ones. Another thing that's really missing here is there is a called shot rule, right? But it's just basically to ignore armor. And I think that one of the things that is so common, what you get in Aces and Eights, for example, which is very common in Western genre, is that, where you're shot kind of matters, right? So shooting someone in the arms, shooting someone in the leg, if someone's gut shot, on the other hand, or you take him out in the head. And so Aces and Eights had this incredible mechanic where you have this silhouette and a target that you pick the point where you're trying to hit. And if you get the perfect roll, which is a 25 in this game, you hit dead center at where you were aiming at, right? And if you hit less than that, it starts moving outwards along that line in a random direction, right? So it could go up, down, side, or to side, right? And when you do that, you calculate what you rolled versus where you started, and that's what you hit. And so if it's outside the silhouette, you missed completely. If it's inside the silhouette, you might have been aiming for the center of the chest, but you end up hitting him in the arm, and you do damage to the arm. And that's a mechanic that allows you to not just say you're not randomly rolling for hit location, because the point is if you're trying to aim in a certain place, the odds are different. If you're firing at the head, the odds of hitting him in the leg are different than if you're firing at his stomach and the odds of hitting him in the leg, right? So that was a really, really brilliant mechanic that they have. And then, of course, the damage was done to specific areas, right, with tables that represent the level of harm done to that body part. And that's something that I thought was very, very clever about Aces and Eights, that made it so authentic for this type of gaming. And unfortunately, I just don't think that with hit points as they are, the dueling rules were an opportunity, but they're too simplistic. They make it too random, because there needs to be a reflection. I keep looking back at them as if it's it should say level at least, right? Something that would allow you to make it more than just a completely random shot, because the guy who's really experienced should be particularly better at dueling than the guy who isn't. And that was a missed opportunity there. Equipment. So you got a ton of standard stuff from some catalog of 1876 or what have you. And you got magic. So there's Wild West magic in this game, which are shamanic spells. This is optional. It says if you decide to include magic. So there's shaman spells of different kinds, a lot of which are basically just D&D spells, right? That's okay because it's an OSR game. And then there's conjurer magic, which is if you're trying to obtain magic from from arcane sources, I guess. And so these are these would be a Western magician in the context of the setting. And because I think that they're borrowing this from other Wretched verse books, like Wretched Bastards is mentioned here. which I have not read yet. It means that I don't have all the details on it. But anyways, the spell casting is based on memorization. You have a spell book, so you're basically a wizard. And every time you cast a spell, you have to do a saving throw. And if you don't succeed at the saving throw, you have to roll randomly to see what kind of effect you have, which are temporary panic or permanent insanities, right? And so there's a list of derangements. So it's a bit adding a touch of Cthulhu-esque stuff to the standard D&D magic. I'm not going to especially complain about this. Right? I wouldn't imagine that you need to have like really medieval authentic magic. Though I think that they could have made an effort to make the native magic more authentic. I think that they kind of just were guessing there. So that's not as great as one might hope. You have some very basic stat blocks for some animals and monsters, like a giant spider, and some people like a Native American warrior. And they have the Devil's Country, which is a scenario that is like, ironically, you would think that they'd put as their first scenario something that was actually in the Wild West, but no, it's a horror adventure for people who are actors in a spaghetti Western production, basically, or a chorizo Western if it's set in Spain, I guess. And then there's like a curse. I'll admit I kind of just flipped through this because the premise doesn't appeal to me. You have like actual pictures of the guys involved. This is a very meta, like this is really kind of fourth wall stuff that they're doing here. I guess it ironically extremely European, only a European would come up with this in their Wild West adventure book as their main adventure of the book, instead of just doing an actual Western, But I do like these kind of fake spaghetti Western art covers, that's clever. So yeah, there's quite a bit of this. And then you have Hellstone. So Hellstone is a kind of, I think it's like a sandboxy type of setting that is obviously a fictional place. I'm not a big fan of this sort of thing. I mean, if I ever do a Western book, it'll be, I'll be setting it in like one of the real places, whether it was Dodge City or Las Vegas or Tombstone or Deadwood. It would be somewhere, anyways, it would be somewhere that was an actual locality of the Wild West, But I can understand the generic Wild Western country allows you to put in all of the stuff if you really want to. And, this is like mid 1860s founded, 50 miles from the Mexican border, dangerous place. It was a tiny town, but then there was gold. They got a whole gold that shouldn't be gold. It should be silver. There's no gold down near the Mexican border. And it's got saloons and dance halls and stuff like that. And there's strange rocks, Native American legends. And I think I missed a page there. Did I? Oh, no. Okay, so the Mexican gang, bandidos, Ignacio Carranza, the Mexican bandito. There's a little map of the town. So it's basically your home base location. And then you have some characters. The sheriff. This guy. Bud Higgins. The bell, literally bell. That does not look like she's from the 1880s. All of a sudden, I think that I heard that Red Room uses AI generated art. So I think that they're like sometimes really trying to put something through it. It comes out kind of funny or what have you, because no one in the 1880s would have dressed like that. Let me put it that way, Red Room. But it's okay. We understand what you're doing here, and we know that this is low budget, and that's, all together, it's not terribly badly done. So you get a bunch of basically it's a bunch of characters, a location. The location could have used a little bit more fleshing out, especially of the town, I think. You get a lot about the people, and that's good because obviously that is an important part of it, right? Like you want to have that clear. And there are some details, right? There's a saloon, a whorehouse, a couple of whorehouses. So the hotel. I guess it's not terribly bad, but I mean, if it would have been me, I would have added some random elements and more. I would have given some kind of more characteristic to the town because it's very. I mean, I guess it's fine because it's very generic, and the DM can always add more details. So I might be nitpicking there. Here you got encounters in the cards. So there's a random encounter system based on using poker hands, which is clever, because obviously if you're, trembling here. If you're using if you're running a Wild West campaign using a deck of cards, especially if you got one that looks suitably Western for something, is kind of fun, right? So this is good. It's like adventure cues based on the cards. So I'll give him that. Miners on strike, and that's basically it. So that's Wretched Country. I would certainly recommend it if you're interested in a Wild Western game. I would suggest to maybe change the hit point levels and some of the combat. I think it could have been done a little bit better, but it's not bad. It's a good basis from which to start, right? As a let's say as a DM, I could certainly, if I didn't have aces and eights, I could certainly start with this and figure out a few modifications to the rules to make it a little bit more like what I wanted. And similar, like if you don't want it to be spaghetti Western and kind of like that kind of nihilistic Western that was from the 70s, if you want it to be either more realistic, historical, or more like white hat, John Wayne type Western, you could do that too, right? Like that's easy enough to modify. The good thing is because it's OSR, you're going to know how to change those things if you really want to. So I would certainly give this a recommendation to people who like OSR products and are looking specifically for an OSR Western. If anyone knows of any other OSR Western, let me know. But as far as I know, this is the only one, apart from Boot Hill, obviously. But I would pick Wretched Country over Boot Hill because Wretched Country is OSR. Boot Hill is technically a separate system from the it's not D&D based. So check it out. I think that it's well worth it. Check out my own products too. Imagine doing like a Western game set in the Silk Road. You could call it Far West, and it wouldn't show up for 12 years or something. But check out my products too. Sword and Caravan, Arrows of Indra, Lion and Dragon, Star Adventure, Invisible College, and all of my RPG Pundit Presents series and Old School Companions. The Gonzo Companion is coming soon, and so is my NPC book for Sword and Caravan, which is going to be full of NPCs and some other little goodies. So be sure to keep up with all that. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Share this video anywhere you think people will be interested in this review. I don't think anybody will be offended by this review. I hope the Red Room isn't. But share it anyways. And we'll see you guys again soon. Currently smoking Dunhill Shell Diplomat plus Cornell and Deal's Old Joe Krantz.